Hi, welcome. Thank you, FIFA, for inviting us to have a conversation in relation to Borderlands, the documentary. I am joined by Mexican-Canadian artist Rafael Lozano-Hemmer, who is one of the 4 artists that the producers of the films have been following throughout the process of creation. And while we did the performance for 2 weeks, about a little bit more than a year ago. So, hi, Rafa.
Hi, Karine.
I am Karine Charbonneau. I'm actually head of exhibitions at Rafael's studio. We've been working together for the past 12 years, so I'm not going to pretend we don't know each other. And I'm not going to pretend I don't know this project. I think this is one of the most important projects of your career, maybe, but for sure it has been for the studio and for myself. So I'm very happy to have this conversation with you today. So just before we go further, I think I'm going to give a little bit of context, and I'm going to explain I will tell a little bit more about you. So as a very short introduction, Rafa, for the past 12 years, no, not 12 years, I'm sorry, that's 20 years. You've been working internationally. You've been taking over public spaces. Your work has been exhibited in museums, galleries, private collections, public and private around the world. You work with technology mostly because it's inevitable. And just to name a very few of the ones that we use at the studio, we have computerized surveillance systems, sensors, searchlight, robotics, paper display, and you're very well known for your large-scale interactive installations in public spaces. Your work is at the intersection of architectures and performance art. Border Tuner is a very good example of that, although it does have something very unique. So maybe we can start for you to explain this work, Border Tuner.
Sure. So thank you, Karine. I should mention that we work in Antimodular as a studio we have in Montreal. We are 15 people from 7 countries, and we're architects, engineers, designers, artists who come together to make these large artworks. So to start, just to mention that Border Tuner was a project to activate the connection between the US and Mexico border. At the height of Trump adversarial nationalist discourse, we wanted to create a work that could highlight the connections that are already existing between the sister cities of El Paso, Texas, and Ciudad Juárez, Chihuahua. Now, these 2 cities form the world's largest binational metropolis in the Western Hemisphere. And it's basically an area that has been a city even before the United States made the division where it is now. It was already a site. So the artwork is basically bridges of light, very powerful searchlights, which are controlled by a little dial. There are 6 stations, 3 in Mexico, 3 in the US. And as you turn this dial, you control the direction of these searchlights as they scan the horizon. When your lights and my lights intersect in the air, the computer opens up the microphones so that automatically I can talk to you and you can talk to me. So through the lights, we create this bridge of sound so that people can speak to each other. If I don't like what you were saying, I could just tune you out and look for somebody else. Over a period of a couple of weeks, every night, we had tens of thousands of people come to the site to speak to each other across the border. The border was not a division between the 2 countries. It was a place to come together. And this was a very important message for us because we wanted to tell a different story from the Borderlands.
Yeah.
Whenever we hear about the border, we hear about violence, we hear about drugs, we hear about migrations, and so on. All of this is true, but also true is a whole bunch of other stories that are not being picked up. So our hope was to amplify the voices of people from both sides of the border to be able to, take over the airspace in between Mexico and the United States.
Yeah, so this project, we've been working on it like actively, maybe 2 years before it happened. This is still an idea that you had in mind, tell me if I'm wrong, for about 5 or 10 years that you wanted to develop this project. But I think I'd like to go back into this period, this process of creation, which I think is very important in such a project, because then you arrive at the borders, El Paso, Ciudad Juárez. You arrive with your own tools, your artistic language, your Mexican cultural and political backgrounds, your vision. And you arrive to create a work for a community but that you don't belong to. So how does that work? What kind of approach do you have to have through those years?
Well, I mean, the first thing is to study what has already happened at the border. Max, if you could show some of the images that I'm sharing, it shows the bridges of light, and it starts showing you what it actually looked like. So the first thing that we did is we studied other artists who have been connecting the border. It's a site of very intense artistic creativity. People like Guillermo Gómez Peña, Rocío Bolívar, Iván Abreu, there is Marco Ramírez R. There's a really long tradition of people who have tried to use this border as a way to interact. The second thing is to really think about a way to make the artwork be not so much about talking to each other, but listening to each other. In fact, Border Tuner is a piece where, yeah, you have these microphones, but really it's the tuner, that wheel that you spin in order to point your lights, that really allows you to hear the other. For me, it was important to research. For example, we did 8 trips to the area in total. So we wanted to make sure that the artwork was not some kind of UFO that would land in the area, but that we engaged the different communities to be able to, sort of include them in the project and ensure that this wasn't an imposition as much as it was a facilitation. Yeah.
How did you feel that the community was welcoming you and your ideas as you first arrived?
Well, I mean, there was enthusiasm because a lot of the artists, a lot of the people in the region feel like the only thing that you hear about them, say in national or international news, is about, the agenda of division and migration and refugees and so on. And while all of this is true, I think that the inhabitants of the area have a very robust connection, right? We are looking at a border that has a lot of links, historical links, fraternal links, environmental links, political links. This is an area where most of the trade between the two countries happens. It's also an area that has almost 70% of the inhabitants in one side have family on the other side. So forever, this has been a very bicultural area. And now with Trump's wall and with the latest set of separations, people felt that the message of unity and interconnection was necessary. At the same time, I should mention that they were also worried. They were worried that I would be one of these artists who shows up in the area and opportunistically makes an artwork about their communities, then leaves no legacy behind. And we wanted to make sure that this project was not just like a photo opportunity and then leave, but rather something that would leave a lasting legacy.
I think that's a very important part. As you were mentioning before, there's thousands of artists showing projects at the borders or just landing over there. So this part of legacy that you're mentioning is extremely important, and it was to you. So how do you leave, or what do you leave behind when you make such a project?
Well, the first thing is the actual experience, right? The memory. So we're watching a video now of different people who are connected through the border. Their memory matters, right? A lot of people who were speaking to the other had never been across the border, for example. This fellow who's speaking now, he was saying, I work for the government and it is illegal for me. I'm forbidden from crossing the border. And he's saying, there's no reason for that. I think I will cross now. So there's definitely a lasting legacy in the memories of those people who participated. There's, of course, the documentation that we're watching. But more importantly is the sense of diversity that came through. So one of the things that we ensured is that every night we had a program. So before the microphones would open to the general public, we would invite, for example, indigenous communities to make their voice heard. It's not just English and Spanish, it's also Tiwa and Ende, the original peoples of the region got to talk, the same as everything from historians, poets, LGBTQ community. We had serenades going across the border. So this memory is long lasting. Another thing that we did not anticipate is there was a lot of flirting across in the microphones. And so that was interesting to imagine that couples may have arisen out of this intervention. More durable is the fact that we created a fund, a grant. We took part of the money of the project, which was funded by philanthropic organizations in the United States and Mexico, and we earmarked that money so that every year binational artists from the region can make their own artwork or their own proposal for intervening at the border. And so this fund is managed by the University of Texas in El Paso. With the curator, Carrie Doyle, is the curator of Border Tuner, who's also together with Leon de la Rosa, Edgar Picasso, and local artists, managing that this money be sent for the production of new pieces. There's other examples of legacy, but I'll just mention those two.
But I think it was very important because through all the thousands of artists present at the borders, there were not so many local artists. That were like having the chance to present such big projects. So leaving this legacy was also important.
That's right. That's right. I mean, I have rarely seen a more vibrant artistic scene than in El Paso and Juarez. These artists, for example, a group called Puro Borde, is putting together this massive, beautiful murals inside of the facilities for the refugees. And I can tell you that after going through, say, all of Mexico from Central America, crossing the border, I mean, all of this is so daunting, so traumatic. And then you get to a facility, which is this industrial space that is literally an industrial wasteland. These artists go there without any payment and beautify and create landmarks and create navigation for the people as a sign of welcoming. And I've never felt that art was so important to be able to have an actual social function. So artists like Puro Borde in the region came and activated the artwork, worked with us hand in hand. And in the end, what we're left with is with friendships, right? A sense of solidarity and community beyond what you have at the border itself.
Yeah, and one part of your work, which is fundamental to your work, is to give a platform to people, like to have a voice, to self-represent, you know? And I noticed like this way of being very humble once you were on site to detach yourself from the work. So how hard is it for an artist to back off, to let go your work into the hands of community or people?
Well, the truth is, in this particular case, not hard at all, because it's not like I came in with any lessons to teach anybody. I was just like everybody else, just seeking to get information and to be inspired. The truth is that if there had been silence, I may have said some things, just express myself just like anybody else in the public. But the truth is that there was a thirst, there was a need, a demand for their voices to be heard. So, for example, the person that we're seeing here is part of the Ende community. I learned that they dislike very much being called Apache. This is something that I learned there. So it wasn't difficult because, again, the content of the work needed to come from the voices of the people. And my job was just to create that platform.
I know, and something with that one of the performer, Casandro El Exótico, like the fighter, the Mexican fighter, Lucha Libre, was saying that, like Touch Me, he was saying that everyone at the border is actually recovering from something, and that using the voice was a way to heal. So without pretending, like being pretentious or token, there is a contribution as a human and as an artist that I know you, that is very important for you, that as an artist you have to intervene. Do you feel like there was, through this work, some kind of like healing repercussions, or what came out of it? What feedbacks did you receive after the project?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because there was some healing. At the same time, there's also a violence, right? There's the violence these lights. These lights are in Mexico, in that region. They're associated, for example, with military helicopters or police helicopters looking for Mexicans at the border, right?
Yeah.
There is a violence to this kind of light of celebration that you might find, well, you know, since the 19th century in large expos and so on, but also, you know, throughout, say, Nazi regime, Albert Speer's massive monuments of intimidation. So how can you use these powerful lights for a message that is not intimidation, but intimacy? And that's what mattered to me, is for them to take them over create something that was more welcoming. And the project itself, I think, succeeded in creating this healing and this intimacy. I think that the clarity with which each other's voices could be heard, the special events that we had there, from readings to concerts to serenades, you know, help people understand their landscape as a continuous connection, as opposed to something that is artificially separated by nationalist ideologies. I should mention that, in fact, Casandro El Exótico, which is, so he's a Mexican wrestler. As you know, wrestlers in Mexico have a theme. Casandro's theme is drag queen. He is the first gay wrestler to actually win a world championship. He was in El Paso side in one of the events, speaking to, on the other side, Miss Toth, who is German female wrestler living in Ciudad Juarez. And at one particular moment, Miss Toth said, "I am here. I am from Berlin. I'm here to tell you that walls come down." And then everybody started clapping. And it was just this beautiful moment of understanding that this division, that this separation is unnatural, and that the right state of affairs is to have the capability for these two cities to continue to coexist as they have so well. Another anecdote that I think is interesting to mention is what the mayor of El Paso said. This is a Republican mayor, D. Margo, and when he went on the microphone, he said, well, even 100 years before the U.S. existed, El Paso and Juarez were already El Paso del Norte, a united city. And one of the reasons I think this is healing is because at the time when Trump came down to El Paso, he put on some wall, and then he said, well, now El Paso is so much safer. And D. Margo, the Republican mayor, actually said, I'm sorry, Mr. President, but El Paso has been one of the safest cities in the past 30 years. And that's precisely because of our interconnection to Mexico and our sort of shared community. So it was beautiful to see that in the field, contrary to what we hear in the news or what we hear from racist agendas, the project itself was a place of community, of intimacy, and even the Republicans well know that that these interconnections are actually mutually beneficial.
Exactly. This project was actually making visible the complexity and whatever the interrelations already existing on site. Exactly. And there was something, there's another project I would like to talk about that you brought to the border, which was another way of connecting the people. So you had the major one, Border Tuner, creating voice bridges, but then you had another connection through the heartbeats. Can you talk to us about this work, Remote Pulse, that was there?
Yeah, let me find the image, because I would like to show you. I'd like to show you what that project does. So one moment. Here it is. So Maxime, if you can please make sure that you can see this. This is inside of Border Tuner. We created this two podiums. They look very similar to just like a little pedestal. As you put your hands on this metal grid, your heartbeat starts being detected and shown in a little yellow light. But at the same time that this is happening, there's a similar station, an identical station in the other side of the border, where this heartbeat is beamed. So right now I'm touching this display and I'm waiting for someone. I'm in the US. I'm waiting for somebody on the Mexican side to touch it. There, somebody just touched it. And then their heartbeat starts being represented by the second light. And at this time, I feel, with a little vibration in my hands, the heartbeat of the remote person, and he or she feels my heartbeat. The piece is called Remote Pulse, and it was a very, very moving piece because it allowed people who have been separated, for example, to just, it's almost as if you're putting your hands on their chest and feeling up their heartbeat. And this was a very moving part of the project. The project also, apart from being installed throughout Border Tuner, the 2 weeks of show, we also donated this project to the cities of El Paso and Ciudad Juárez, so that in the future, these two stations will be installed in two plazas, so that at any given day, all the time, people can come in and feel the heartbeat of somebody across the border. It's a very romantic, sexy project. And what I like about it is that you don't really know who is the other person. You don't know if it's a child or an older person. You don't know their race, their ethnic group, what language they speak. And that's the poetry of it, the idea of this kind of shared syncopation that keeps us alive, how to make tangible the humanity of the region. And this project, Remote Pulse, was our contribution.
Yeah, and I have to say that for myself, this project was as powerful as the other one, because the feeling of, like, when you feel the heartbeats in your hand of this person that you don't know, but you feel this connection, it was very moving. It was also creepy. It was like, it gave me goosebumps every time I've tried this project.
Yeah, and I think that it's also like making tangible, right? Like part of the problem with Border is that the data, right? The data, speaks volumes because, again, this is the largest trading exchange between the two countries. Everybody is connected fraternally. But what about beyond the data? What about the emotion? What about the connection? How do you reach out and touch somebody who is being separated from you? And so this is a piece that is inside of the tradition of experiments that they do in the region. For example, every few months, the Border Patrol and Border Security allow people to come in around the river bank and hug. And there is this moment where families come temporarily to be able to hug each other, and then they have to return to their countries. So these are very beautiful moments of connection. But of course, they're insufficient, right? When you have this wound, when you have the separation, we need to think of ways to remedy this distance. And that's what this project tried to do.
Yeah. And, I know this project was very, customly produced for the border, El Paso, Ciudad Juárez. We have thought at the studio sometimes to bring this to other borders, maybe at some point. Do you think it's something, now that we've done the project once, do you think it's something that one day you'll want to do? To explore other borders?
Yeah, so after we did this project, somebody asked me if I would consider doing this piece, both pieces, across the Palestine-Israel border.
Exactly,
and I immediately said no. And part of the reason why I immediately said no is because I don't have enough information. I've never been to the region. I think it would be preposterous to suggest that a project like this can just be imported into a conflict area without proper thinking about and engaging with the local communities. So one perhaps exception is I might consider doing this across Windsor and Detroit because I've been to both Windsor and Detroit. And I think what's interesting about that particular border is, in this case, the power dynamic is the US is wealthier and Mexico is less wealthy. But there's not a similar, but a different, but also a dynamic across the US-Canada border in Windsor and Detroit, which I think may be interesting to explore. So I might consider it there. Ultimately, it really is a project for El Paso and Juárez. So I might consider doing it there again.
In a different version, of course. I think that would
exactly.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Rafael. It's a pleasure to talk about this project all the time. I want to thank again FIFA. Yeah, do you want to say something before we end?
Just to close, I want to mention that there is a website called bordertuner.net. Bordertuner.net, all one word. And in this place, we have photography, we have archives. And as soon as we get through all of the videos that we generated, I think it was something along the lines of 600 or 700 hours of filmed interaction. So once we get through it and we videotape it and we edit it, we will put it up on bordertuner.net. So I just want to make sure that people who are interested in the project can go there.
I think that part was great to see, like, people from both sides interacting with each other and seeing how kids also were interacting with older people. There was like so many different connections happening. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah. And that's documented in the website. So if people want to see that, that would be the place to go.
Thank you. Thanks again. And thank you, FIFA. Thank you for everyone for being attending this conversation. And I wish you all a very good 39th edition of the festival. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.